She didn't know he owned part of the airline until it was too late. Jordan Whittaker didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. One calm sentence, one quiet message. That's all it took to turn a humiliating moment into a reckoning. By the time the plane landed, the flight attendant who judged him by his skin, not his seat, would realize who she had tried to move. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, like, subscribe and turn on the bell because this one changes everything. The polished floors of Atlanta International Airport gleamed under the early morning sun that poured through high glass panels. Announcements echoed gently overhead, mixing with the rolling of suitcases and the low hum of travelers speaking in multiple tongues. Amid the bustle, a black family moved with quiet grace, unrushed, confident, and completely unaware that a storm of judgment was about to form around them. Jordan Whittaker, 42, stood tall in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and polished brown leather shoes. His broad shoulders and calm expression gave him the air of a man used to commanding boardrooms, but not through loudness. He radiated control. His trimmed beard framed a face that rarely betrayed emotion, and today was no exception. He carried a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and with the other gently placed it on the conveyor belt at security with practiced ease. Beside him, his wife Danielle glided in a cream-colored wrap dress that caught the light with every step. Her natural curls were pinned back, revealing high cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. At 39, she exuded the kind of poise that made people straighten their posture when she passed. Yet there was warmth in her, especially when she looked down at their son Miles, barely 5 years old, bounced beside them in a navy sweater and khakis, clutching his toy airplane like a lifeline. "Are we flying this one?" he asked, pointing out the window toward a plane being refueled. Danielle laughed softly. "Not that one, baby, but it'll look just like it." Jordan knelt briefly beside him. "Window seat, just like you asked." Miles's eyes lit up. The family made their way to Gate B-17, where a Liberty Air representative welcomed them with a smile. Boarding had just begun for first class, and the Whittakers stepped forward as the agent scanned their tickets. A chime confirmed their clearance. Jordan gave a polite nod and led his family through the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was a cocoon of plush cream leather seats and dim golden lighting. Soft jazz played overhead. Folded blankets, bottled water, and carefully arranged headphones awaited each passenger. The air smelled of citrus and leather, sterile yet elegant. Danielle guided Miles to their seats, 2A, 2B, and 2C. She handed him a coloring book and tucked his toy plane next to him. Jordan placed their carry-ons in the overhead bin, adjusting the strap of his briefcase with precision. Then he sat down beside them, one hand resting gently on Danielle's arm. Across the cabin, a woman watched. Caroline Reeves, mid-30s, blonde hair tucked tightly into a regulation bun, stood rigid near the galley, her posture crisp, her liberty. Air uniform was spotless. Her smile, however, faded slightly. The moment she saw the Whittakers, she picked up her tablet and walked over. "Good morning," she said with mechanical cheer. "May I see your boarding passes?" Jordan turned calmly, his expression unreadable. "Of course," he said, retrieving the passes from his inside pocket. Danielle looked up, sensing something in the woman's tone, too tight, too rehearsed. Caroline took the tickets, barely glancing at the family as her eyes scanned the names and seat numbers. There was a pause, slight but noticeable. "Thank you," she said before walking off without another word. Jordan's eyes followed her retreat. He said nothing, but a subtle tension settled across his shoulders. Danielle gently rubbed Miles's back as he scribbled away, oblivious to what had just occurred. Around them, a few heads turned. One man across the aisle raised his brow. A woman behind them narrowed her eyes, then quickly looked away. Nothing had been said, but something had shifted. Jordan leaned back into his seat, jaw tight behind an otherwise calm face. This wasn't new. He had seen it before in lobbies, hotel check-ins, gala receptions. The polite surprise that always followed when someone saw a black man in a place they didn't expect him to be. And somehow, no matter how calm he remained, it was never quite enough. He reached down and picked up Miles's toy plane, placing it gently on the tray table. "Let's enjoy the flight," he murmured. But part of him already knew they wouldn't be allowed to. In the narrow galley tucked behind the first-class cabin, Caroline Reeves gripped her tablet tightly, her brow furrowed. She stared at the digital manifest, then at the names she had just read off the boarding passes: Jordan Whittaker, Danielle Whittaker, and Miles Whittaker. Seats, 2A, 2B, and 2C booked, confirmed, checked in. And yet, something didn't sit right with her. Caroline tapped the comm panel and quietly called the gate desk. Hi, this is Reeves in first class. I need a quick confirmation on 3 passengers, Whitaker, Jordan, Danielle, and Miles first class. I just want to be sure the reservation is legitimate. The voice on the other end was cheerful but confused. One moment. She shifted her weight, glanced out at the cabin, and then turned as footsteps approached. Haley Foster, the junior flight attendant assigned to help with first class, appeared in the galley, organizing a tray of orange juice glasses. She was younger, early 20s, with a patient demeanor and observant eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at Caroline's stiff posture. "Just verifying something?" Caroline replied. Her tone clipped. The voice returned over the comm. "Yes, here they are. Jordan, Whitaker, and family. Booked 3 weeks ago, paid in full with platinum status. All set." Caroline's jaw tightened. "Thanks," she said, ending the call without further word. She didn't move right away. Instead, she stood there motionless, staring past the edge of the curtain toward the back of Jordan's head. There was nothing objectively wrong. No red flags. No alerts. But her instincts, a deeply ingrained, unspoken sense, whispered otherwise. They didn't look like first-class regulars. She couldn't explain it logically, even to herself. It wasn't the way they dressed. Jordan's suit was impeccable. Danielle's elegance was undeniable. The child was well-mannered, content with a toy plane, but still they didn't fit. Not with the usual clientele she greeted in this cabin every morning. Not with the quiet CEOs, the gray-haired politicians, the Silicon Valley consultants. Caroline adjusted her collar. "I'm going to follow up," she muttered. Haley turned to her. "You already got confirmation," she said cautiously. Caroline didn't meet her eyes. "It's a protocol issue." Haley tilted her head. "Or is it something else?" There was a beat of silence. Caroline brushed past her, her shoes clicking against the galley floor as she moved back into the aisle. As she approached row 2, Jordan looked up without expression. Danielle remained composed, though her hand was still resting on Miles's back. The little boy was giggling softly, folding and unfolding his tray table. "I'm sorry to bother you again, Mr. Whitaker," Caroline began, voice tight. "There appears to be a slight inconsistency. I'll need you to step aside briefly so I can verify your seating with the cabin lead. If you'd be willing to join me in the galley." Jordan studied her face for a moment, long enough to note what she wasn't saying. Then he nodded slowly and stood. "Of course," he said calmly. He turned to Danielle. "Stay here with Miles. I'll be right back." Danielle nodded, eyes never leaving Caroline. As Jordan followed the flight attendant down the aisle, a few heads subtly turned. A man in seat 3D lowered his newspaper. A woman to the left glanced over her glasses. The air seemed to shift. No turbulence, no alarms, just a creeping sense that something wasn't right. In the galley, Haley watched Jordan approach. She stepped aside silently, offering him a respectful nod. Caroline stood beside the service counter, arms crossed. Jordan folded his hands loosely in front of him. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "Something about the profile of a first-class passenger didn't match your expectations." Caroline blinked but didn't respond. He didn't push. He simply waited. And in that moment, the quiet pressure of his presence said more than a raised voice ever could. The galley felt colder than it had moments ago, though nothing in the cabin temperature had changed. Caroline Reeves stood across from Jordan Whitaker, arms crossed, lips drawn into a line so tight it barely passed for professional courtesy. "I appreciate your patience," she said in a clipped tone. "But as you know, this is a premium section. We're required to verify all seating assignments when inconsistencies arise." Jordan remained still, the quiet hum of the engines filling the silence between them. "There were no inconsistencies," he replied evenly. "My family checked in properly. Our boarding passes were scanned. What exactly are you verifying?" Caroline hesitated. "We have screening procedures. Sometimes passengers are flagged randomly for additional checks. It's part of protocol." Jordan tilted his head slightly. "I wasn't flagged by security. TSA cleared us. This is internal." He kept his voice calm, but his words carried weight, each one placed with intention, like a measured argument laid before a jury. Caroline's eyes flickered. "We're simply trying to ensure accuracy," she said. Then, almost as if she couldn't stop herself, she added, "You have to admit, first class attracts a certain clientele, people who fly frequently, executive-tier travelers." Jordan took a breath. There it was. The mask had slipped, even if only slightly, and behind it was something far older than policy. "I see," he said quietly. "And based on what?" "My appearance. My skin. My son playing with a toy airplane instead of reading the Wall Street Journal. Caroline stiffened. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. Behind them, Haley Foster stood silently at the edge of the galley, frozen mid-movement with a tray of mimosas in her hands. Her face had gone pale. Caroline, she said softly, I just checked the manifest myself. There's no discrepancy. His name, his ticket, everything matches. Caroline turned sharp. Thank you, Haley. I'll handle this. Haley didn't back down. With respect, maybe we shouldn't be handling anything. He's a paying passenger. So is his wife. So is his child. Caroline ignored her, pivoting back to Jordan, but before she could speak, he pulled out his phone. He turned slightly away from them and pressed one contact. The call connected immediately. This is Jordan Whitaker, he said into the receiver. His tone remained smooth, unhurried. Is this still the right time? A short pause, then he nodded once. Good, proceed as planned. He ended the call without explanation and slipped the phone back into his jacket. For a moment no one spoke. Caroline shifted, suddenly uneasy. Shall we return to our seats? Jordan asked with soft finality. She hesitated, then gave a slight nod. They moved back through the aisle together. As they passed through the first-class cabin, a few heads turned to watch them. Whispered questions floated in the air like dust caught in light. Was that about him? Something wrong with the ticket? Why did they pull him aside? Danielle looked up as they approached. She met her husband's eyes, not with alarm but with clarity. He gave a subtle shake of his head. Not yet. Not here. He settled into his seat beside her. Miles glanced up with a smile and handed Jordan the toy plane. Did you fix it, Daddy? Jordan nodded and placed the toy gently back on the tray. All taken care of. But inside his mind was working. Fast. He'd played this game before. Dress the part. Speak with composure. Meet their suspicion with restraint. And still it wasn't enough. He looked out the window, jaw set. They weren't done with him. Not yet. The tension returned before the announcement. Caroline Reeves stood in the aisle of first class, back stiff, arms clasped in front of her. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes betrayed hesitation. Jordan Whitaker, seated beside his wife and son, looked up calmly. I've just received further instruction, she said, voice clipped but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, we'll need to temporarily relocate your family to the main cabin while we resolve the seating issue. A hush fell. Even the background jazz seemed to dim under the weight of those words. Danielle Whitaker blinked once, then again. Her hand instinctively slid around Miles's shoulder, drawing him close. She didn't speak, but her nostrils flared as her gaze locked on Caroline. Her voice, when it came, was low and measured. Is this necessary? She asked. I'm afraid it's protocol, Caroline replied, just until things are clarified. Jordan didn't move at first. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved his phone. With a practiced swipe, he opened a message thread and typed just 4 words. Initiate Flight 271. Now. He pressed send, then turned to his wife and nodded. It's fine, he said quietly. Let's go. Danielle rose without a word, but her silence was a shield, not surrender. She gathered their carry-on and helped Miles down from the seat. The murmurs began like a low tide. That's ridiculous. Why are they being moved? They've been here since boarding. Jordan heard it all. Every word felt like a pinprick, not because they were directed at him, but because they weren't, because they were whispers, unsure, unwilling to challenge the real issue aloud. As they stepped into the aisle, the weight of a dozen stares followed them, some sympathetic, some curious, a few openly skeptical. The kind of glances black families know too well, the ones that ask without words. What did they do? Miles clung to his mother's hand, his brows furrowed. Mommy, he whispered, tugging gently. Why are we moving seats? I thought we were sitting up front. Danielle knelt down briefly, brushing a curl from his forehead. Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept it even. It's just for a little bit, sweetheart. We'll still be on the same plane. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Jordan walked ahead of them, his steps measured, his spine unbent. Caroline followed behind, saying nothing. They reached row 22, 3 narrow seats crammed between strangers. A crying infant wailed 2 rows back. Someone sneezed into a tissue. The overhead bin was already full, so Jordan tucked their bag beneath the seat in front of them. The difference was stark. The plush leather had been replaced with scratchy fabric. The space to stretch had vanished. The sense of dignity violently snatched. Jordan sat beside the window. Miles in the middle, Danielle on the aisle. She clasped her son's small hand tightly, trying not to show how much her fingers trembled. Inside, her fury burned hot. She'd kept quiet for Miles's sake, for Jordan's peace, for the public scene she didn't want to cause. But every cell in her body screamed. They had been removed, publicly unjustly, and everyone saw it. She glanced at her husband. Jordan stared forward, his expression unreadable, but she knew that look. The stillness before a wave, the calm before consequence. He wasn't done, and neither was she. The cabin didn't return to normal. Even after the Whitaker family had been seated in row 22, a current of unease flowed through the aisles like a silent wind. First class, once quiet with the subdued clinks of champagne glasses and murmured small talk, now buzzed with soft but steady chatter. A middle-aged man in seat 1C adjusted his cufflinks and leaned into the aisle as Caroline Reeves passed. "Excuse me," he said, just loud enough to be heard. "That family, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker." They were perfectly polite. "Why were they moved?" Caroline stiffened. There was a seating discrepancy. She replied quickly. "It's been handled." He frowned. Handled. Looked more like they were humiliated. Caroline offered a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's protocol." But as she turned into the galley, she nearly collided with Haley Foster, who was waiting arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You can't do this," Haley said quietly but firmly. Caroline blinked. "Excuse me?" Haley stepped closer, voice low but insistent. "You can't treat people like that. You pulled a black family out of first class in front of a whole cabin even after the system confirmed their tickets." "Why?" "Because they didn't look like your regular flyers." Caroline glanced around the galley, suddenly feeling exposed. "Watch your tone, Haley." "No," Haley shot back. "Watch your actions." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the intercom buzzed softly. Caroline turned, thankful for the distraction. She lifted the receiver. "This is Reeves." The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. "The captain." "Miss Reeves," he said, his tone tight. "I've just received a direct message from corporate. Someone high-level reached out to us regarding a situation in your cabin." Caroline's pulse skipped. What sort of situation, she asked, though she already knew. The captain didn't sugarcoat it. "A passenger in first class has a direct line to the board. They've asked for an immediate update. I need to know what happened, and I need it to be clean." "No surprises." Caroline swallowed hard. "It was a procedural check," she said. "There was some confusion with a first-class reservation. There was a pause. You removed a paying family from first class during boarding." "I was following up on something," she replied, now faltering. "There were no flags in the system, but..." "But what?" Caroline hesitated. "I had a concern about ticket misuse." The silence that followed was deafening. The captain finally replied, "I suggest you tread lightly. We can't afford a misstep here." The line clicked off. Caroline hung up the receiver, her hand lingering on the panel. Her face had gone pale. She turned slowly, her thoughts racing. Who had he called? What kind of passenger had she just removed? Behind her, Haley watched every flicker of panic in her supervisor's face. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Danielle sat quietly beside Miles, who had dozed off with his head on her lap, but her ears were sharp, catching whispers from passengers around them. "Did you see how calm he was? That man didn't raise his voice once. She said there was an issue, but I don't buy it. They looked legit. Honestly, if that were me, I'd sue." Danielle kept her gaze forward, but her grip on the armrest had whitened her knuckles. Back in first class, a woman near 3A leaned toward her husband. "I think something big's about to happen," she whispered. "This feels... off." Caroline returned to the galley, her hands trembling slightly. She had crossed a line, and now it was too late to retreat. Caroline Reeves's fingers hovered above the service tablet, her breath shallow as the captain's voice echoed in her mind. "We've been contacted by someone high-level." She hesitated only a second longer before typing into the airline's internal passenger database, "Jordan Whitaker, Flight 271, Seat 2A. The result loaded almost instantly. Name: Jordan Whitaker. Status: executive level shareholder. Liberty Air Holdings Designation Board. Liaison clearance. Priority service. Tier 1. Access. The words hit her like a slap. She stared at the screen as if it had betrayed her. Her throat constricted, and for the first time that day, her polished mask cracked, not from protocol or pressure, but from shame. She had humiliated a man who owned part of the airline. Behind her, Haley Foster crossed her arms, leaning silently against the galley wall. "Now you see," she said quietly. Caroline spun to face her. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Haley's gaze didn't waver. "It's not our job to know who people are. It's our job to treat them like they belong here unless proven otherwise." Her voice was steady, each word slicing through the tension. "You didn't need his profile. You needed respect." The truth settled into Caroline's chest like wet cement. She tried to form a response, but there wasn't one that would matter now. She moved on, instinct nearly bumping into a beverage cart as she made her way down the aisle toward row 22. Her stride was slower now, not from hesitation, but from the heaviness that comes when the full weight of one's mistake begins to press down. When she arrived, she found Jordan seated beside his sleeping son, expression calm, posture straight, as if not a single thread had been disturbed. Danielle, however, turned to Caroline with eyes like ice. Her face was a portrait of silent fury, controlled but unmistakable. Caroline cleared her throat, barely able to meet their gaze. "Mr. Whitaker," she began, her voice thinner than before. There's been a mistake. I wasn't aware of your designation at the time. I'd like to apologize personally." Jordan's eyes rose to meet hers. He didn't blink. He didn't interrupt. He simply let her speak. Caroline swallowed hard. "Your original seating in first class is ready. I'd be happy to escort your family back now." A few passengers in nearby rows had gone still. The moment hung, stretched thin. Jordan tilted his head, his voice soft but sharp. "We'll stay here for now." Caroline blinked. "Sir." He held up one hand, not angry, not flustered, just firm. "You've said enough," he replied. "We're comfortable." It wasn't a refusal. It was a message, one she understood all too well. Danielle turned away from Caroline without a word, her arm resting protectively around Miles. The restraint it took, not to speak, not to expose Caroline in front of everyone, was costing her dearly, but she knew her husband well enough. He wasn't done. Caroline stood frozen for a beat too long, then nodded, retreating down the aisle in silence, her back damp with sweat. She didn't dare look at the other passengers. Not after what they'd heard, not after what they'd seen. Back in the galley, Haley didn't say a word. She just handed Caroline a bottle of water and went back to her tasks. Caroline took it with shaking hands. She'd built her career on knowing how to control the cabin, how to maintain poise in turbulence. But this wasn't turbulence. This was consequence. And it had just begun. The soft chime of an incoming message pulsed on Jordan Whitaker's phone. He glanced down. "Sender Liberty Air Corporate, subject formal apology. Immediate attention required message. Mr. Whitaker, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding and the manner in which you and your family were treated. We are initiating an internal review and will coordinate with you for full resolution upon landing. Your continued support and partnership are invaluable to this airline." Jordan read the words twice, then once more. He said nothing. He simply tapped open another screen, composed a brief, measured note to his legal team, and typed, "Begin documentation, full review. Flight 271. Include all video logs, crew reports, and passenger witness accounts." He hit send. Across the cabin, whispers were no longer subtle. "That was him, right? The guy they pulled from first class. He owns part of the airline. Can you imagine?" He didn't even raise his voice, and they still treated him like that. Haley Foster, halfway through distributing drinks, caught snippets of every comment. The tone had shifted. What began as murmurs of discomfort was becoming open dissent. As she stepped into the galley, Caroline stood hunched over the service counter, her shoulders tense. Haley paused beside her, voice barely above a whisper. "You need to understand something," she said. "He's not done." Caroline didn't respond. She was already pale, her fingers drumming nervously on the stainless steel surface. Haley continued, "Whatever you thought this was, a seat shuffle, a protocol check. That's over now. You embarrassed the wrong man, and more importantly, you showed the cabin who you are." The silence between them stretched thick and accusatory. Meanwhile, in seat 22A, Jordan reclined slightly, his arm around Miles, who had fallen back asleep against his side. He stared out the window at the endless sky, soothing, quiet, indifferent. But inside, something heavier stirred. Not anger, weariness, a familiar weight. He thought back years ago, sitting across from a boardroom full of executives. He'd come armed with numbers, projections, vision. And still the questions came. How did you get in this room? Do you have experience at this level? Are you sure you're ready for this kind of responsibility? He remembered smiling politely. He remembered answering every doubt with calm precision. He remembered when they stopped asking questions and started listening. But even after all that ownership success, a name that mattered, he still had to prove he belonged, still had to be calm when wronged, still had to smile when slighted, because one wrong move and they'd reduce him to a headline. Angry black man disrupts flight. Danielle looked over, her eyes full of unspoken emotion. She could read it all in his face. The restraint, the pain, the calculation. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jordan nodded, but it wasn't real. He was tired of having to be more just to be seen as enough. A row behind them, a young woman whispered to her partner, "They better do something about this. That man's been humiliated for no reason." Danielle heard it, and for the first time in the flight she smiled. Not because things were fixed, but because people had noticed they weren't alone in this. And Jordan, he wasn't done. This wasn't just a response. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The wheels of Flight 271 touched down on the tarmac at LAX, the soft jolt reverberating through the cabin like the quiet beginning of a storm. The engines wound down, but the tension in the air only thickened. In the front galley, Caroline Reeves stood stiffly beside the jump seat, eyes fixed on the closed cabin door ahead. Her uniform, once crisp and commanding, now clung to her like a burden. Her earpiece crackled faintly. Reeves came the voice of the captain. "Remain on board. Security and corporate are waiting. You'll be briefed and questioned before disembarkation." Her stomach dropped. "Understood," she replied, voice hoarse. She caught Haley Foster watching her. No smugness, just quiet disappointment. Back in row 22, Jordan Whittaker straightened his jacket, then gently nudged Miles, who was still curled against him. "Time to go, buddy," he said softly. Miles blinked, confused. "Are we there?" Danielle leaned over, brushing her son's curls back. "Yes, sweetheart. We've landed." As the cabin doors opened with a familiar hiss, sunlight poured in, but it wasn't ordinary light. It was the kind that revealed everything. Standing just beyond the jet bridge were two uniformed security officers, 3 Liberty Air executives in charcoal suits, and farther back 2 members of the press, cameras slung discreetly over their shoulders. Passengers whispered as they filed out, glancing at the somber cluster ahead. "Something's happening," a woman murmured. "That's him," a man whispered. "That's the guy from first class, the one they kicked out." Jordan rose first, then Danielle. She took Miles's hand gently, keeping her back straight, her expression unreadable. Their walk down the aisle was slow, deliberate. The first-class cabin fell silent as they passed. No words, just eyes, watching, judging, respecting. At the threshold, the lead executive stepped forward, a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses and a strained smile. "Mr. Whittaker," he said, voice tight with tension. "On behalf of Liberty Air, I want to extend our deepest apologies for what occurred on this flight. We're deeply sorry." Jordan looked at him, not unkindly, but without warmth. Danielle stood beside him, dignified. Miles clutched his small toy airplane, but stayed quiet instinctively, sensing the weight of the moment. Jordan offered a single nod. "We'll speak soon." The executive blinked, then nodded, stepping aside to let them pass. Behind them, the last of the passengers began to disembark. Some paused to offer small gestures, a glance of respect, a sympathetic nod, even a quiet "Sorry," from a young woman near the door. Caroline remained in the galley, watching from behind the curtain, heart hammering. She didn't need to see the security officers walking down the aisle to know they were coming for her. She closed her eyes briefly. The reckoning had begun. Back in the terminal, the Whittaker family moved with calm purpose. Their presence slowed the crowd. Travelers turned to look, some murmuring as they recognized Jordan's face from business headlines. Danielle held Miles close, her face poised, her walk steady. She didn't need to speak. Her silence carried more weight than any statement. Jordan's phone buzzed again. Another message from his legal team. Subject: press inquiries already circulating. Status: we've begun our statement. Standing by for your final approval. Jordan tapped once to acknowledge, then slid the phone back into his coat. They exited into the glare of Los Angeles sun, heads high, posture unbent. No outburst, no spectacle, just presence, just power. The walls of the Liberty Air boardroom were made of glass, but to Caroline Reeves they felt like steel. She sat at the end of a long, polished table, her back rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Two HR representatives, one legal advisor, and a silent executive with a thick binder sat across from her. "We're not here to debate feelings." One of them began flipping open a file. "We're here to review protocol violations, professional conduct breaches, and the potential for civil liability." Caroline's voice cracked. "I didn't know who he was. I thought—" The legal advisor cut her off. "That's precisely the problem." Outside the room, the press swarmed the front of Liberty Air headquarters. Headlines scrolled across cable news: "Airline under fire. After shareholder removed from first class. Due to racial profiling. Justice." For Whitaker's was trending nationwide. Meanwhile, in a smaller adjacent conference room, Haley Foster sat calmly before another panel. I watched everything she said evenly. There was no confusion about their tickets. It wasn't about protocol. It was about appearance. She saw a black family in first class and decided they didn't belong. The room was silent. A senior VP scribbled notes as Haley continued, her voice unwavering. "Jordan." Whitaker didn't raise his voice, didn't demand special treatment. He was calm, respectful, and still he was humiliated in front of an entire cabin. One of the executives asked quietly, "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" "I tried," Haley replied. "She ignored me, and I didn't push hard enough. I won't make that mistake again." Across town, in a sleek high-rise office, Jordan sat with Danielle, flanked by his legal counsel and senior advisors. Representatives from Liberty Air's executive team sat across the table, their posture stiffer than the chairs. "We acknowledge the mishandling," the airline's COO began, "and we're prepared to offer full reinstatement, a public apology, and restitution." Jordan didn't blink. "This isn't about upgrades," he said, "or apologies." He leaned forward, voice low, controlled. "This is about culture. The systems you've built, the bias you ignore until it threatens your reputation." Danielle spoke for the first time, calm and cutting. "If my husband hadn't owned part of your company, would you be here right now?" The executives fell silent. Flashbacks flickered in Jordan's mind, long nights building Whitaker Equity Partners from a two-person consultancy to a national firm. The early rejections. The deals that fell through. The doors closed without explanation. They had built their company with one principle at its core: access to justice. Not just in courts, in boardrooms, in airports, in everyday life. Back in the city, public support surged. Opinion pieces filled major papers. Why equity isn't optional in customer service. He owned the airline and was still profiled. Talk shows discussed the incident. Civil rights advocates spoke out. Haley's testimony leaked and went viral. The damage to Liberty Air's reputation wasn't just internal, it was everywhere. That evening, Danielle stood at their kitchen island, flipping through social media as notifications poured in. "People are sharing their stories," she said quietly. "Airports, hotels, banks." Jordan looked up from his laptop. "They see themselves in what happened," she nodded. "And they're angry." He exhaled slowly, the weight settling over him. "This isn't about getting even," he said. "It's about making sure the next black family in first class doesn't get asked to prove they belong." Danielle reached for his hand. "Then let's make sure they don't." The sun was just beginning to rise over Los Angeles when Jordan Whitaker stepped onto the rooftop terrace of his firm's headquarters. The city pulsed quietly below, unaware that inside this building a movement had begun. He stared at the horizon, coffee in hand, reading the latest update on his phone. Liberty Air announces comprehensive reform package, mandatory bias training, independent oversight, and passenger bill of rights. The company had also formally issued a public apology not only to the Whitakers, but to every passenger who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy. But for Jordan, it wasn't victory, it was just momentum. Inside, his assistant tapped lightly on the glass. "You're due in 20, sir. CNN just confirmed they'll broadcast live." He nodded. "Thanks, Maya." Downstairs in their home, Danielle was packing Miles's lunch for school. He sat at the counter, kicking his feet and drawing a plane with crayons. "Mommy," he asked, "are we still mad at the lady from the airplane?" Danielle smiled softly, crouching to meet his eyes. "No, sweetheart. We're not mad, but we're making sure she and everyone learns from what happened." "Is that why Daddy's on the news now?" "That's right," she said, brushing his cheek. "He's helping people understand that it's never okay to treat someone badly just because of how they look." Miles seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to coloring. Later that day, Jordan stepped onto a stage at a national civil rights summit in Washington, D.C. invited not just as a businessman, but as a voice. The room was full of journalists, advocates, and everyday citizens who had followed the story from the beginning. He didn't use notes. I didn't ask to become a symbol. He began, his voice steady. My family and I boarded a plane expecting nothing more than a safe flight. We were calm. We were quiet. And still we were questioned, moved and shamed for fitting someone's stereotype but not their standards. A hush swept the room. But this isn't just about one flight. This is about a culture that says, "Show me proof you belong." And it's about answering with dignity that we don't need to. Applause echoed, Jordan continued. My message to every company in America: if you serve the public, you serve all of it. No more profiling, no more excuses. And if you can't make that promise, then expect to be held accountable. Back home that night. As the family sat down to dinner, Danielle glanced at Jordan across the table. You spoke for all of us today, she said softly. He nodded, eyes weary but clear. I didn't do it for applause. I did it so that the next little black boy holding a toy plane doesn't have to grow up wondering if he's allowed to dream. Miles looked up, smiling. That's me, right? Jordan chuckled. Exactly. Outside their window, planes passed overhead, distant but steady symbols, not of division, but of connection. And for the first time in days, Jordan allowed himself a moment of stillness. Not because the fight was over, but because the course had been corrected, and that at last was a beginning. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. The story of Jordan Whittaker reminds us that dignity and silence can be more powerful than outrage. He didn't lash out, he didn't seek revenge. He stood tall, spoke calmly, and forced a system to reckon with itself. Because sometimes the strongest response is grace under fire, and quiet power can move the loudest mountains. This story shows that prejudice carries consequences, while calm, deliberate action reveals true strength. It reminds us that racial profiling and unconscious bias still exist on airplanes, in boardrooms, at check-in counters, and in everyday life. Such incidents don't just happen to strangers. They happen to families, to professionals, to people who've done everything right, yet are still asked to prove they belong. In our personal lives, we should learn to pause before judging, to see the person, not the stereotype. In the workplace, we must demand fairness. Speak up when silence protects bias and build systems that uphold equity. As a community, we must hold institutions accountable, not just with outrage, but with persistence and purpose. By practicing respect, humility, and awareness, we build a future where dignity isn't a privilege, it's a given.